Hey, it's Scott. Welcome back to Spin Magazine's Lip Service. On today's show, Adam Duritz of the Counting Crows, 20 million records, 30 years, the Counting Crows. I think you're going to really enjoy this. We get into everything from his early beginnings to working at the Viper Room to Kate Moss's birthday and everything in between, including the stories behind some of their biggest songs like Mr. Jones and Accidentally in Love. And we even get into his top 5 favorite restaurants. Coming up in just a moment, Adam Duritz of the Counting Crows. Welcome back to Spin Magazine's Lip Service. I'm with the amazing Adam Duritz. How are you, my friend?
I'm good. Making it through the snow.
I know, it's crazy. It's a big snowstorm today. It was like 5-7 inches. You never know what you're going to get. Sometimes it's like an inch, and they say it's going to be 2 feet, but luckily we both got here. Thanks for coming. We have the same birthday, which is amazing.
It's cool. You never think of birthdays as being rare things because they're kind of random. Right. Do we have a rare birthday? Are we the only people that have it?
I don't know. It doesn't, maybe Bob Weir, isn't he? I feel like
Jerry Garcia.
Jerry Garcia. Okay, I knew one of the Grateful Dead, yeah.
Yeah.
And weirdly enough, that date has a lot of significance because I think in 1994 you opened up for the Stones August 1st too, or something.
Yeah,
like
it was my 30th birthday.
Amazing.
Chuck D too.
Amazing.
Yeah, that's a pretty... Me, you, Chuck D, and Jerry.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
I feel like August has a profound, even August and everything after. I mean, it means so much to you. But we have a lot to get into. We were just chatting about the fact that we have a lot of mutual friends. Randall would include our good friend from many years ago, and Courtney and all these people that we were just chatting about. But talk to me a little bit about just growing up. And I know that you moved around a lot. Just growing up, you kind of moved and eventually ended up in Berkeley. So talk to me about your early years.
Well, when I was born, my dad was still in medical school, so he was just finishing up medical school in Maryland, and so we moved to Boston. He went to work at Mass General for his internships and his training, and then it's the Vietnam War right then, so he ended up in the Army, and we ended up in Texas for a while, in El Paso, and I think when he got out of the Army, we went to Denver to finish his last year of training, and then he back to Texas, to Houston. He was doing some research and teaching for a bit, and then he really wanted to practice. So we ended up, a friend of his from Denver and from the Army, I think, had started a practice out in Northern California, and so we moved out there.
And your mom went to medical school too, right?
Later, yeah. She went to medical school about 5 or 6 years after that. She went down to Mexico and then Chicago.
And growing up musically, tell me what you were listening to. I'm sure music was all around you. I mean, we'll get into obviously freshman year when you started writing music, but what were you listening to in those early years?
A lot of different stuff. I mean, I grew up in my first concert and I think my first record, Jackson 5. My parents took me to see Jackson 5 when I was a kid. And that's my first album too. Either Jackson 5's Greatest Hits or Michael Jackson's first album, Got to Be There. But there was a radio station in the Bay Area called KSAN, which is kind of where the birth of freeform FM radio in the 60s. And they played everything. I mean, it just seemed like there was no rules, so you could hear a Willie Nelson song or a Waylon Jennings song followed by the Sex Pistols or the Stones or Miles Davis or P-Funk. It just seemed like... So I kind of grew up thinking music was just music. Like, it really didn't seem very genre specific to me. I just listened to a lot of different stuff.
Were your parents into music?
Yeah, they had a bunch of records. Well, it was a weird thing. They had a bunch of records, but I never saw them listen to them.
They were just sitting there.
Yeah, I mean, but I did. They had all the Beatles records, or most of the later Beatles records, the last half of the career. They had... like Supremes, stuff like that. They had that Apple Records, James Taylor record, Taproot Manuscript, the one he made when he was on Apple.
Yeah.
Some Tapestry, probably, Carole King. Fifth Dimension, I remember. They had and then a lot of like show tunes stuff, a lot of like Broadway music, and then a lot of classical. I mostly listened to the rock and the pop stuff.
Was it hard to make friends moving around so much as a kid? Because obviously you went, every year it feels like you were in a different place for a while.
I mean, up until I was about 10, we changed every year or every few years. Texas being the exception. We were there for a bit. it was, I didn't, I have a dissociative disorder, and I could see that being a part of it, being difficult to connect to people when I was a kid, especially because it was a new group of people every time, and I was very quiet, very internal. I read a lot. I would make friends, but then we would leave.
That must have been tough.
Well, it was all I really knew about. Until I came out to California. It all seemed kind of logical. Like, it's mostly because my parents were still young when I was born. So he was still doing stuff. Like, he wasn't settled in his job for another 10 years after I was born. So, and plus at that time, with the Vietnam War going on, everybody, a lot of families dealt with a chunk of time in the Army. That's just kind of what we went through back then. I didn't really think anything of it until I was out in California. Then you started going to school with people who'd known each other forever. And that was a complete, that didn't make any sense to me. I just didn't, I didn't know how to, like, I didn't have any touchstones to relate to people who'd known each other for a long time, who'd had friends since they were little kids. They went through all their years of school together. I didn't know anything about that. And it took me a while to adjust to that kind of.
Although later on, Immer is somebody that's been in your life for many years, and even we were talking about our friend Randall. So you do have friends, I guess, that you've been friends with for probably 30 years. Or,
now, sure. But not in school. That happened afterwards. I mean, I have friends I've been with. Three of my best friends we met when we were 15, I think. We've been friends since then, and we're still really close.
That's awesome.
But not before then. Those are the first friends I made that really have been in my life for that kind of time.
And eventually you end up in Berkeley. So talk to me a little bit about the music scene. From what I can remember playing there years ago, there was like the Stone, and I'm trying to remember all the clubs I played at back in the day. There, Stone being one in particular, I feel like was the Stone and maybe the Oasis in Oakland.
Yeah,
a couple of clubs that were really happening back then. But was there a scene in Berkeley? Do you remember, like in an early age, were you sneaking out and going to some of the clubs in like your teenage years and in college?
Well, yeah. Before the Stone, there was the Keystone in Berkeley, which was the Stone was in San Francisco.
In San Francisco,
Broadway,
right?
But
Exactly.
The Keystone was on University, and like I got a Keystone club card when I was. I don't even know how. I don't think I was 18. I'm not sure. I may have had a fake ID and got it, which allowed you to get into all the shows all the time.
I remember I had a fake ID, and the guy, the bounce once, like rubbed it off. He's like, "You're not coming in here. This is,
Dr. Elaine Chang. I don't see it. No. I mean, I started going to see shows mostly like when I was young. They were the big shows, like Day on the Green, Bill Graham's big like stadium things that he had. I remember going to see Robert Fleischman and then Eddie Money, Sammy Hagar in Boston.
Amazing.
I remember seeing ELO when I was a kid on the Out of the Blue tour, the one before the Spaceship tour.
Sure.
Then, started off in Oakland and then Berkeley. So, funk music is really big. I remember having a lot of really being into the Commodores and Earth, Wind and Fire and P-Funk. But at the same time, it's the late 70s, Elvis Costello and Graham Parker, Joe Jackson. You got the new wave punk on one side and the funk, kind of urban funk, American funk on the other side. And like I said, because of K-San, I think it just seemed like it was all just music. I don't think I even thought of it in those terms. That's just what we listened to. A couple years later, it was Prince. We were just into what they were playing and what was great. And it just seemed like, at a certain point, I remember buying the Rolling Stone record guide, that big book they have. Yeah. And all the pictures in it were of 5-star albums. It'd be
Abbey Road,
or
Van Morrison,
Let's Stay Together, Astral Weeks. And I remember I got an idea at one point. I should learn all the 5-star records. So I just started going through and checking out. That's how I learned about Al Green, because there's a picture of him. Let's Stay Together. I got that record, and I learned more Al Green. I think when I realized how much I love music, I took the idea of it almost like a
course,
and I used that book to find the records, and then I would go to the used record stores and get them. I think at one point I went through all the Stones records, just starting at the beginning and going through all the Stones records to figure out, okay, it's not just because, it had I can't remember what the name of the Hot Rocks was. I had that, just like I had the blue and the red Beatles records, but it was a different thing to go back and listen through them. So you're not just hearing Brown Sugar, you're hearing
everything.
Everything.
Beggar's Banquet and all the sticky little
Aftermath,
fingers.
yeah.
So early on you did that. Were you always interested in writing music, or wasn't until college really, right? That you started you got the bug to write music, I think your freshman year or so, right?
Well, my mom went to boarding school. No, my mom went to medical school in Mexico, and I didn't want to go. I felt like I'd moved around a lot. I didn't want to leave anymore. And I ended up going to boarding school instead. I just kind of was rebelling, I guess. But I ended up in this boarding school in Connecticut, and I had a really rough time that year. It's when the mental illness first started kicking in. And so I started writing a lot of like really, really shitty poetry. I remember reading No One Here Gets Out Alive, that book about Jim Morrison, and thinking, oh yeah, man,
this
doom.
is me.
I just started writing all this really terrible poetry. And then sort of some of it, I would sing it to myself and see if it's, the idea of making songs kind of came to me, but I didn't really make any. And I was a freshman in college when I wrote my first song.
Did you recognize the mental illness at that point as something that you knew that was happening to you, or it was just later on that you got diagnosed? Because early on you probably didn't know what that was, right?
Well, I didn't know what it was, but I knew something was very wrong because it was getting a little hallucinatory when I was when I was away at school that year. Things were very dicey. It was clear to me that this isn't just shyness. This is unhealthy. This feels very distorted and semi-hallucinatory and disturbing in a way that is, I should go talk to somebody, which I did, trying to figure it out. But it's hard to figure that stuff out, especially at 15, 16. It's kind of too young.
Yeah.
But I started writing stuff inspired by just really doom. It was, they're terrible, terrible stuff.
Do you remember the first song?
No, the first song I wrote as a song?
First song.
Yeah, that I do. The one I wrote when I went to college.
Yeah. What was that?
It's called Good Morning, Little Sister. I was a freshman at college. My sister had gone to Mexico for a year with my mom, but she'd come back. And she was 16, and that's a tough time to be a girl.
Yeah.
I was gone. My mom was gone. My dad works a lot. It was just her and my dad. And she was just really, having a hard time. And I was sitting in a class, I think it was like a chemistry class, and I just started thinking of this song, and I wrote it down, and I was humming. I could hear it, verse, chorus,
Because the music would come first for you, right?
Well, this is just a tune in my head and the lyrics, which is the first time I'd kind of written something that was like, oh, this is actually a song. This isn't just, I feel like I've got a whole thing here. And I after that class, I went back to my dorm, and I lived right in the middle of the dorm, and there was a lounge with a piano right across the hall from me. So I went across the hall and locked the door to the lounge, and I just sort of sat down and picked at notes until I found a note that I was kind of humming. And then I knew how to make a major and a minor chord. It's just like up 4, up 3, that's a major chord. Up 3, up 4, that's a minor chord. And so I picked at it until I figured out the chords for the song. It took me the whole afternoon. This song would take 15 minutes now. But then it took the whole day. I skipped the rest of my classes and I wrote the song. Like I could play it and sing it, which is a different thing than just humming something to yourself. This is actually music I can play for people. When
you think back on that song, is it a song that you're proud of, or is it a song that you're like, this should never see the light of day?
No, that one's better than a lot of the stuff that followed it for a long time. I don't know that it needs to be on one of our records now,
right.
But it's a pretty simple, heartfelt, good song. It's real simple, but it's got this honesty to it. That's, I was just trying to write about my sister struggling and that I loved her, and it was very heartfelt. But it was like a light bulb going off in my head. Like when you're young, like the hardest thing most people go through in their 20s, which is why people get excited about turning 20 or 18 or whatever when you're an adult. But the truth is the 20s are hard because you spend all your time trying to figure out how to be who you're going to be. I think in your 30s, sometimes you figure that out and you're into living now. But in your 20s, you don't know how to make that transition from all I have to worry about in life is my social life and my homework to what do I want to do with the rest of my life? How am I going to take care of myself, and how is that going to satisfy me,
Because what were you going to school for at that point? You were literature, or you were
I was an English major. Yeah. I thought maybe I'd be a lawyer. So I don't know what the fuck I was thinking. I don't really have any idea, But when I wrote that song, it was like oh, I'm a songwriter.
That's it.
And I knew it. I was 18. It was the fall term my freshman year. And I knew what I was. I knew what the rest of my life was all about. I didn't know how to do it. But all that question stuff was gone. Like I knew the moment I finished that song, I'm a songwriter. That's what I am. That's who I am. Like I was way ahead of all my friends on getting definition. I fell behind again when it came to jobs. They all got jobs and they started moving forward in their life. I was still, washing dishes, doing landscaping, doing construction. I worked at a video store, but that moment when I wrote that song was, revelatory.
Do you then call your parents and say, I'm a songwriter, I'm going to drop out of school?
No, and I didn't really want to drop out of school because it seemed to me like I was learning all kinds of stuff. Not like, it's not trade school. I mean, you want to write songs, you got to have stuff in your head.
Yeah.
What I tried to do is use this in school. Like I changed the way I wrote essays and papers. I started writing these almost impressionistic papers, right. Which would either get me an A or an incomplete with a note from the teacher to come explain it to her afterwards, But even that was a little later. That was more when I was at Berkeley.
They're like, this looks like song lyrics. It feels like a song.
I mean, it was a big deal though, because you felt so unformed. Mm. And then I felt like something.
Safe to say when that happened, you started writing like every day. You became almost like a bit obsessive about it, right? Because I think as soon as that light bulb went off in your head, you're like, okay, I think I could see myself doing this from now on.
Yeah, from that point until we started making our first record, really, I wrote all the time. I played piano and wrote every day. I really stopped after the record. But before that, I just wrote all the time. It was all I did. I went out and had fun and did other stuff too, but I was near a piano with a notepad constantly from the age of 18 for 10 years. Then, for about 10 years. I just never did it. I just wrote constantly. I wrote 1 million songs in that period, most of which aren't that good, but they're not supposed to be. You're learning to be you. You're learning, especially as a songwriter early on, a lot of what is, the biggest challenge to being a young artist is to recognize what's your art and what's something that sounds like something is good. Because in the beginning, what is good is what you've seen other people do.
Well, of course.
And so a lot of your work is really reflective of other people. And, you're trying to learn, oh, how's this guy do this? So you do it, and oh, it's a song. But, when you can shed some of that is when you do original stuff, which takes a while. I felt like it took me a while.
Had you discovered Big Star and some of those bands are around that point? Or was that before then?
No, I knew Big Star. I think I knew Big Star by then.
Fairly underrated band. I mean, one of the better bands for sure ever, and incredible. Alex Chilton and
biggest band in my life.
Yeah.
I had read Big Star was a band that I probably found them right before them because I had read about them for years. I mean, it's hard for people to understand this now, but records used to go out of print, and so when they did, you couldn't find them. There was a lot of records that weren't wildly successful that you just couldn't find. When I was a kid, Modern Lovers records, all the Fairport Convention records, all the early Richard and Linda Thompson records, the Big Star records, of course, were out of print before they were. Number One record was out of print before Radio City went on sale.
How did you discover them? Because they weren't really on the radio that much, or were they at that point?
No, not at all. So I read about them. They were like a lot of
Cream
bands.
magazine or whatever it was.
Yeah, it was Cream, Rolling Stone, our interviews with REM and the Replacements.
Sure.
That was a big wave, is that REM, I think, early on. But there were a couple other people that had talked about it. I'm trying to think who it was, because REM would have been right after that, because I got the Big Star records when I was a freshman, either right before my freshman year or right after it. My parents took me on a trip to England. The family went on a trip to England. And one of the things I did was I had this list. Growing up, there were all these records I had read about but never found. Like I said, Modern Lovers, Pet Sounds. Although I'd gotten Pet Sounds by this time.
That feels like that would be easy to find.
No, not then. It was because now it's like this famous classic record, and the story of him making it and falling apart is famous. But the whole Smile story. But back then it was just a failed Beach Boys record.
Yeah, true.
And so it was completely out of print. You couldn't find Pet Sounds when I was a kid. I had to I called record stores all around the country when I was in high school, and I found a record store in Boston that had that, and I bought it.
Amazing.
And he sent it to me. I think I got my dad to write a check for me, and I sent it to the guy in Boston, and he sent me Pet Sounds.
There was also that Columbia Records thing where
I had that with the clubs. I got a lot of records that way. Yeah. You'd make a membership on Columbia Records, and then you also got like 5 free records for every friend you signed up. So Adam Duritz signed up, Frederick Duritz signed up, Duritz Adams signed up, Frederick Adams, and you just get this pile of records for free. I'd done the math on it. It was incredibly cheap.
But what they didn't tell you is that you had to buy a record for like $25 and like 11 records confirmed, right?
I did the math on it. The records came out to like $2 each. It was really cheap.
I never did the math on it.
So I had 5 memberships to Columbia Records growing up.
All aliases.
Yeah. Well, one not alias, and the rest were aliases.
Lip Service will be back in just a moment. Friends, some of you that know me well know that I'm a huge foodie. If you check out our top 5s, you know there's always a food conversation to be had. That's why I want to talk to you about my favorite cookware on the planet, in the world. That is Hexclad. Hexclad is not only my favorite cookware, it's also Gordon Ramsay's. And as you know, he's a tough critic. If it's good enough for Gordon Ramsay, it must be good enough for me and my cooking. Let me talk to you about Hexclad. Hexclad revolutionized the cookware industry with their all-in-one hybrid pan. Their nonstick features and versatility of your grandma's cast iron and durability to last a few lifetimes are just some of the great reasons to use Hexclad. Hexclad has a lifetime warranty. These are literally the last pots and pans you'll ever have to buy, which is amazing. Check out their 6-piece set. You can cook just about anything in it. I'm cooking eggs, steak, seafood pasta, and you name it in their pans. It's great for cooking a steak on date night or having a dinner party and showing off your cooking skills. My specialty is chicken parmesan, and I think the best eggs that you'll ever taste. Thanks to Gordon Ramsay for the cooking tips. Anyone you buy these for will definitely thank you. Check out the link, hexclad.com/lips. That's HEXCLAD.com/LIPPS for 10% off cookware for a limited time only. Head over to hexclad.com now. And don't forget, you'll get 10% off cookware at hexclad.com/lips. Happy cooking and bon appetit.
I went on this trip to England with this. I had this list I've been making my whole life from reading Rolling Stone and reading Cream and people talking about music I couldn't find. And I went through every used store in England, every used record store in England while I was there. And I found every single one of those records, including on the very last day, I found the Thunderclap Newman record.
Amazing.
But yeah, so I had this suitcase that I had bought for holding records with about 25 records in it that I bought on that trip. And when I got home, it was just sit in front of the record player for weeks, Billy Bragg and the Modern Lovers first record,
sure.
And the Big Star records and Alex Chilton's solo stuff. So when I finally heard it, it was probably the most influential of any music in my life at that point.
Incredible.
Yeah.
So you start writing music, you're in college, and walk me through some of your early bands. I think there was a band called Model Society and obviously the Himalayans, but walk me through how that all transpired and how it started to take place for you.
Well, I had been up at Davis for the first couple years, but I was writing so many songs and I felt like I needed a more challenging English department for one thing. Berkeley was the best English department in the country then.
Great food.
Yeah. And also I needed to be someplace I could play, because only bands that played in Davis were cover bands playing at frat parties, which is fine, but it's not what I wanted to do, you know? And so I transferred down to Berkeley, and a guy that I knew in high school was a drummer, and he put a bunch of guys together in a band, and we started playing some of my songs and some other stuff, but we started with my songs. I was the piano player in the band for about a week and a half or 2 weeks maybe. And then I got to rehearsal one day and this guy was there, blonde-haired kid with curly hair, who was just incredible on the piano. He was just playing. And I said, hey, and they said, oh yeah, hey, this is Dan. He's our piano player. And I said, I thought I was the piano player. And they said, no, you're the singer now. He's the piano player. And so we played together for a while. We never played any gigs. We played one gig. We decided to go in. I was working as an assistant engineer in a recording studio. I'd called a bunch of studios trying to get a job and found one that was studio likewise. And we wanted to go record in there. And so, but our guitar player was joining the Navy to join the Navy band, which is a pretty high-end band, you know? And so he was only there for the first side of the 45. And we had the other side to do. And Dan, the piano player, said, let me bring in my best friend. He's a really good guitar player. And the guy made me pay him $40, but that's how I met Immer.
Amazing.
I may have met him before that at a gig, but he came in and played with us. And the song Back to Baltimore, which also kind of holds up all this time.
Yeah.
That one and Good Morning Little Sister. So I got to know Immer, and, you know, that band kind of split up. But then I put together Model Society a little while after that, me and Dan, the keyboard player. And the bass player that he brought in to play in Model Society was his friend Marty Jones, who's Mr. Jones.
Sure.
So we started playing, the three of us, our friend Mike Robinson on guitar and Tom Pope.
Any covers, or was it all originals?
In Model Society, lots of covers, because we'd have to play all night. You know, you play at these bars where you play 3 sets.
Yeah.
And so we had this cover band called Your Mom that opened for us that played like blues covers and stuff. And then we would play
Van Morrison. Like, what were you doing then?
Trying to think. Will It Go Round in Circles, the Billy Preston tune.
So more soul and R&B stuff.
Compared to what? The jazz song. But also like Peggy-O, traditional but dead song.
Yeah.
All kinds of different stuff. We played all kinds of things. We did a few Creedence songs, but a lot of different kinds of stuff. And my writing was kind of, because I had, you know, Marty was really a funk bass player. And so, you know, my writing went to doing a lot of that then too. Wrote a lot of stuff that was more based on a guy who could slap, you know, and who was a really good funky bass player. And, you know, Marty and I also then played in our kind of spare time during that. We were one of the versions of Sordid Humor, Tom Barnes' band that Immer was in as well, at times. And Model Society broke up after a couple years, and I decided I was kind of going to quit playing music.
Because you were frustrated with...
Well, it was my first real band. And, you know, being in bands is hard. You have all your friends, you're playing with them, and then you're fighting with them. And then you're telling them what to do because you're the songwriter, and you had to decide to take charge, but you were a democracy, and now everybody's kind of frustrated with you. It's a hard thing. It's the dividing line between why a lot of people have music as a hobby, or any art form as a hobby, and why other people do it for their lives, because it's not about fun anymore. Hobbies are for fun, and people mostly play music for fun. But then you run into something that's not fun, which is what being in real bands is. Yeah. And then you decide, you know, you hear people say it all the time, it wasn't fun anymore, so why do it? Exactly. Well, that is the dividing line between hobbies and life.
I always tell people, if you're never in a band, you'll never understand the dynamic of being in a band, what that's all about. It's really hard to understand that unless you actually live it.
Yeah, collaborative art forms are rough, man. Yeah. Like my girlfriend, you know, is a writer and an actor, does theater, and last year she taught herself to produce so she could make a short. Her and her friend wrote and produced the short. She's the lead in it, you know, and so you got to put a whole film set together, and, you know,
it's like
we had a lot to talk about. You know, it was a collaborative art form. It's like, look, this is hard stuff. You're doing great, but this is, you know, you got to expect it to be like this. Don't get frustrated because it's really tough. And, you know, she did a great job. Ended up in a bunch of festivals. But yeah, that was tough, and I think I just didn't enjoy it. And so I decided I would go backpacking around Europe with some friends as a nice kind of break, and just to kind of draw a line between that part of my life and then get on with the rest of it. But while I was over there, Dan was over there playing piano and making money in bars and traveling around. And we met up in Amsterdam. We ended up playing this gig together in this restaurant. And we opened with this Bobby McFerrin song, Feline. And then the second song we played was this song of mine. I don't remember what it was called. But the outro, I had kind of ripped it off from Joe Jackson's song, It's Different for Girls.
Sure.
It was a long repetition of the line, who said anything about love? You know, and I'm singing that, and it's a fucking killer version of that song. We're just crushing it. And it's over, and I step back from the mic, and I know the place is about to erupt. And instead, no one claps at all. Like, not a single person made a single sound.
Not even the bartender.
Nope. And the piano was right by the door, which was open. And on the other side of the door was like the doorway and then a table. And I heard this Dutch guy say to his friend, "Laugh, laugh, laugh, blah, blah, blah." And up till that point, I had really been thinking, you know what? I'm not ready to quit playing music. In fact, I'm going to just scrap the rest of my trip. And Dan and I are going to get gigs all over Europe. And we're going to make money playing music. And then laugh, 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 blah, blah, blah. Okay. Go to Greece, just sit on a beach for a while. So we split up from Dan a little while later, ended up heading further east in Europe.
And at that point, you're like, I'm not going to do music anymore. I'm going to go for
I'm quitting it.
You're quitting.
No,
this is it.
Like I thought.
You're like, fuck this guy, and I'm stopping to play.
And because clearly he was annoyed at this song that I thought I had written that was brilliant, although in retrospect, it was totally ripped off from Joe Jackson.
Sure. But at a certain point, you decided to get back into it.
Yeah, I mean, I found myself, I kind of fell in love with this girl, this Australian girl I met in Greece, Anna. And I got kind of heartbroken, and that made me want to start writing stuff again. But also, I got some postcards from Immer, who had joined Camper Van Beethoven, and they were going out on tour, opening for 10,000 Maniacs at the height of their fame. They were playing the Greek Theater in Berkeley the next week. I had this whole postcards from him.
You're like, I better get back into this.
Fuck this, man. I got to go home. And I got to get back into playing, because clearly, Immer's in this band. They're signed to Virgin. They're going on tour,
How old were you back then? Were you 20?
I was 20. It's 1989 summer, so I'm 25.
25, yeah.
So I headed back home, and I actually wrote like a song on the plane. When I got home, I found Marty. I went over to Marty's house and said, "Hey, look, I got this song. We should go to work." I forgot one thing. The night before we left, Marty took me to hang out with his friend Dave Bryson, who had actually done sound for us on the farewell gig for Model Society. So I'd met him very briefly, but Dave had a studio called Dancing Dog down in Emeryville, in a warehouse down there. And so, like the night before I left, or 2 nights before I left, we'd gone down there just to Marty just wanted to kind of jam, and we ended up writing like 2 or 3 songs and recording them in a studio, and they were pretty good. Me, Marty, his cousin Toby, who was a drummer, and Dave Bryson. And I think the keyboard player from Dave's band before that, Mr. Dog. And so I had this stuff that was pretty good that I'd done right before I left. And then I had the song I wrote on the way home. And so we started a band. Me, Marty, his cousin Toby playing drums, Lydia, the Mr. Dog keyboard player, and Dave. And we just started playing, just rehearsing in the warehouse where they had worked, but I was kind of, once again, we never played live. We just kind of did some recordings that were pretty good. But I don't know. I still wasn't over how difficult it had been being in the band. And so Marty and I decided to quit at one point. And I'd sat around for a while not playing much. I was living in a warehouse with Immer. And
he's on tour.
He's back at this point, but he's playing all the time. He's in like 9 different bands, and he's also producing a lot of stuff. And he comes home one day with the SF Weekly, the free weekly. And he's got this ad circled in the classifieds, and he goes, "Call these guys. They listen to the same shitty music you do. You cannot sit around here the rest of your life in this warehouse. Go play." And so I called this number, and the next day I went to, the guys auditioned me like a day later, which was the Himalayans.
What did the ad say, by the way? Was it like,
I don't even remember. It was just a bunch of different music.
Yeah. If you like Van Morrison and this.
No,
and
it wasn't that. It was more like psychedelic stuff. It was like Robin Hitchcock or something.
Right, okay.
It was different stuff. Yeah, not like the Dead. It was much more like acid psychedelic rock music, and some funk stuff. And it turned out that the night I called them, they kind of decided on a singer that that day.
Oh, wow.
But they didn't want to tell me not to come in the next day. So I came in and they ended up firing the other guy like a day later. Because we wrote like 4 songs in that session with me, just kind of, they had a little 4-track running in the studio. And just in that rehearsal, we came up with like 3 or 4 songs that were pretty good. You know, it took me a while I had to write out the lyrics for them, but they started playing, I started singing, and everything just kicked in. And it was that way right away. And the great thing about Himalayans for me was that it was just a total democracy. I didn't write any music for it at all. I just wrote like lyrics to the music we'd come up with. And it was just kind of fun. We just had a great time. It was really envelope pushing for me music-wise, not stuff I would normally have written. I mean, I can barely play piano. I'm not very good. So the kind of music I could write was really limited early on. Still kind of in a way. But the Himalayans was all really kind of psychedelic, funk, rock, everything. It was just different, punky. And it was really just liberating for me, because I was just playing music. We all kind of did everything together. We got a manager, which none of my other bands had ever had. We started playing gigs all over the place. People were coming to see us and loving it, you know? And I wasn't like in charge. And so I didn't lose my friends in the band, you know, like we were all friends and it was great. In the middle of that, you know, Dave Bryson had called me at one point and said, hey, there's all these, let's go play an open mic or something together. Because I had been doing some writing, even though I wasn't bringing it into Himalayans. I was writing some stuff.
And did you know the songs you were writing were as good as Odyssey?
No, I didn't know how they were. They felt good.
Yeah.
I mean, you always think they're good because you're always making progress. Like all the songs I wrote at that time, I thought were great, and they were for where I was. You know, none of them are really with the exception of one. Round Here was a Himalayan song, which of course actually ends up on records. But no, we played some open mics and really flipped people out with some of the other stuff I was writing. Like people were really, and some of the open mics then came to us and said, hey, we want to hire you to play a set in the middle of our open mic night. Like, and then, hey, would you kind of come into the bar and play next Thursday? You know, and we started getting gigs with just the 2 of us playing acoustically.
Under what name at that point was it?
Counting Crows, which is what that band with Toby and Marty had been called too. A couple of places really wanted us to have a band. And so he brought a couple guys from his old band, Mr. Dog, their bass player and drummer. The bass player was Matt Malley, who was our original bass player. And we started playing some bar shows too. But really, I'm in Himalayans, and that's my main thing. And then Sordid Humor asked us to come in and play too. Marty and I started doing more gigs with Sordid Humor again. And occasionally me and Immer would play bass in Sordid Humor with the drummer from Camper Van Beethoven.
So you're really in 3 bands at this point.
Yeah.
When Counting Crows gets signed, you're in 3 bands.
Yeah. Well, by the time we got signed, I wasn't. But at this point, to my mind, I was really just in Himalayans. I was doing shows with Dave because it was fun to do. Just open mics, they didn't really matter, and we were playing covers and some songs I'd written, but I didn't really want to get back into doing that again. And in Sordid Humor, I was just really singing harmonies. I did background vocals and harmonies. It was my friend's band. We all thought they were beyond brilliant, and which is why we all wanted to play with them sometimes, even though we all had other stuff to do. But then this guy, at one point, Dave and I played an open mic upstairs at the Paradise Lounge in San Francisco.
Sure, I know it well.
That little triangle stage in the corner there.
Yeah.
And a guy came to see us from EMI Records, and he talked to us afterwards and said he's a A&R guy for he was a VP for EMI, and he wanted us, would we come down in a week? He wanted to talk to us about signing us. Could we come make a trip to LA the next week? And we were like, it seemed a little weird to me because like Himalayans is getting pretty big and I'm really into it, and I didn't want to go be in an acoustic band really. You know, I wasn't sure what that was, what the guy was thinking. But at the same time, the other stuff, I have been writing more songs and kind of feeling more like I'm ready to lead a band again in a way that I wasn't with Himalayans. but I had all this material, and I had been kind of feeling like I kind of wanted to try this vision I had of some stuff, you know? And so we go down a week later, and it's weird. The guy has us come in at like 6 o'clock, which is the record company's closed. And we go to his office. He opens the door for us and walks us through this dark record company.
You're like, am I going to get attacked or am I going to get a record deal?
It was like a weird thing to be there at that time of day. Like, usually I didn't know this at the time, but you know, they want to show off the record company to you. Everything is going on. They want to take you into the closet where they have all the records they're making.
Give you some records.
You know, so it's not, I couldn't identify why it felt so weird, but I knew it did. And we ended up talking with him in his office. It turns out he's not really an A&R guy. He's the VP for soundtracks, which is a very different department from A&R. He's not really someone who signs acts.
He snuck you into the label, basically.
Yeah, but he wants to sign us. But it's not his purview. It's not his job, and it's going to be rough to do it. So what he wants to do is he wants to offer us a development deal and give us $10,000 to shoot a video. And he's got the idea for the video, and he tells us. And we had been covering the Himalayan song Round Here acoustically at this point. And he was really blown away by that song. And his vision is we're going to shoot it on the stage in the Paradise Lounge where we played it. It'll be dark in there and just this curtain of lasers. And then we'll start playing acoustically. And as we begin to play the song, we'll slowly begin walking forward. And you'll see our faces kind of come out through the lasers.
It's like a Star Wars scene or something.
We'll both be dressed in black pants, black turtlenecks, black sports coats.
It's kind of amazing.
It's fucking Simon and Garfunkel. You know what I mean? It's like an upscale Simon and Garfunkel. And we'll play the song, and then as we get to the last part of the song, we will start to move backwards again, and we will retreat through the lasers.
Amazing. He was onto something with the song, though.
Right. So while I'm like, I've never had anyone from any record company talk to me about any band I've been in. This is the day he came to see us play was the day after my 27th birthday. So I've been in the clubs for almost 10 years, and no one from any record company has come to talk to me about anything. And here's this guy at a big record company, you know, like EMI, that's a huge record company. And he wants to sign us, but I mean, a development deal kind of sucks to me because it means you lose all of your leverage. They give you $10,000, but they own you. So when you go to sign a deal, it's whatever deal they want you to sign. And also this, it's not even one of our songs. It's a Himalayan song, and it's horrifying, the video, because that's not who I am at all. You know, like, but it's a big deal, you know? And we go home and we're like, I don't know what to do. This doesn't feel right. But, you know, maybe we need like a lawyer. Maybe we need to find a lawyer. And maybe we need to make a band.
And also, by the way, in 1983, getting a record deal, that was it, right? If you got a record deal, you were like off to the races. Well, now it's different.
You weren't really, because like the graveyard for bands isn't unsigned band. It's signed bands.
That's true. But it was like a goal that every band had in mind.
Oh, it's huge, because it's like, how do you rise above obscurity to actually get a chance out there? It's nearly impossible. Yeah. And
so what'd you do at that point?
It's 92, 91 or 92 at this point. Not. So the other thing was like, maybe I do want to do a little more with these songs. So maybe we should put together a band and start playing some of this stuff. So we each kind of picked our favorite people. He picked Matt, the bass player from his old band. I had always wanted to play with Charlie Gillingham, who I knew Charlie because I'd played a million gigs with bands he was in, opening or them opening for Himalayans or Model Society. I played a lot of shows with him. He was in a lot of bands with Dan Vickery. And I really wanted to play with him. And then there's a drummer, Steve Bowman, who was in a band called the Mad Affair, which rehearsed downstairs from Dancing Dog Studios in the same warehouse. So we got some of our favorite people and we started like rehearsing and trying to like record some stuff. We had done those recordings in the beginning with that first band after I got back from Europe. And we had done some recordings with the bar band version, just a few more songs. And we started doing some recordings with this new band. And it was great. Like from moment one, we all started playing together. It sounded amazing. They got what I was trying to do. what me and Dave were trying to do really at that point. And Dave recorded it. And he's a really good engineer. So everything sounded great. And we decided to start playing a few gigs. And we already, back then you had to get a mailing list together to get people to come to your gigs.
Flyers, pass out flyers. There was that whole thing too, yeah.
So, but we had mailing lists from all the bands we'd been in. Charlie was in a bunch of bands. I was in Himalayans and Sordid Humor. Dave had been in Mr. Dog. So we had when we put it all together, we had a huge mailing list. So, and like I said, Himalayans was pretty big at this point. So Counting Crows got pretty big pretty quickly. A lot of people came to the shows right away. I was still not sold on it being my thing because Himalayans was a great band. And we started looking for lawyers too. And we ended up finding this guy. Literally, it was my friend's dad was a lawyer, criminal law in San Francisco. He had a friend who knew a guy at a firm that did entertainment law. That guy knew another guy, and that guy knew a guy in LA. And it was like through 8 people, we got a cassette to this guy in LA after we finished the first recording sessions for Counting Crows for this third version of the band. So we have like 5 songs from that first group of recordings with the first band. We had about 3 or 4 songs in the second group. And we had another 4 or 5 with this new recordings we had just done. So we had like a 10, maybe a 14 track demo, which is
unheard of.
Way too many songs. You need to put 1 song on a demo, maybe 2. If you're really feeling confident, 3, because you don't want to show people shit. And you also don't want to bore them because they don't want to listen through stuff. People got like 5 seconds to be interested in you and then they throw it out.
And now a word from our sponsor. I want to take a moment to talk to you about a product I love. Shaving your jewels doesn't have to be risky business anymore. Thanks to our friends at Manscaped and their Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra, you can forget about nicking your bits. This trimmer is all about keeping things smooth and safe so you can trim with all the confidence in the world. Fancy a stress-free shave and some savings? Head over to manscaped.com and snag 20% off plus free shipping with code LIPPS LIPS. With Manscaped, it's easy grooming and no surprises. And who doesn't want to look good? I'm not afraid to admit it. I get manicures from time to time. I like to groom. You should all like to groom. And if you're not too careful, you can cut yourself unless you're using Manscaped, especially for those delicate spots. Be sure to check out the Manscaped Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra. Your body will thank you from the top to the bottom. This 5th generation trimmer features 2 interchangeable next-gen skin-safe blade heads, a standard one for taking a lid off the top, and a new foil blade to go smooth wherever your heart desires. With dual LED spotlights, you'll achieve better visibility, making every trim more precise and hassle-free. Worried you'll make a mess? This bad boy is waterproof. You can take it in the shower, in the bath, even in the ocean. I love this thing. It comes with a compact case. I take with me everywhere I go. Trust me, this trimmer will be your best friend. This trimmer will be your crown jewel's best buddy. Get 20% off and use the code LIPS, LIPPS, when you check out at manscaped.com. That's free shipping at manscaped.com. 20% off for LIPS when you check out. You'll thank us and your body will thank us. For a moment, I worked at Arista Records. I was that guy listening to those demos. If I had seen a 14-song demo, I would have probably thrown it out.
Yeah. So this guy gets this tape from us. But the one thing about it is the first group of songs had Anna Begins. The second group had Mr. Jones and Omaha, for sure. The third group had our version of Round Here, A Murder of One, a Rain King, maybe.
Pretty great songs.
It had a lot of good. And so the guy calls up a couple weeks later after we'd sent the tape out, like, I don't know how long it was. I get this phone call one night at my house, pick it up. The guy's like, hey, I just wanted to say this tape is great. I got to finish listening to it. I'll call you tomorrow. Okay, thanks. Click. He picks up the phone. Then my phone rings like 5 seconds later and he goes, sorry, this is Alan Leonard. I'm a lawyer. You sent me your tape, your demo. Okay. So the next day, he calls me. He's freaking out over the demo tape. And
the double album.
Yeah. It's a 15 songs long demo. But he's freaking out. And he wants us to come down and see him in LA like the next weekend. So we go down there and we meet with this guy. It turns out he is Tom Petty's lawyer. He's the lawyer for Warner Chappell Music. He's a really, really big music lawyer, like a shark. And he wants to be our lawyer. He says, this is a gold mine. Like, we want to sign you guys. And I still don't know what to do because I'm like, I wasn't really expecting this. Although by this time I'm really enjoying playing Counting Crows. You know, this is different than the acoustic stuff. I really like this.
Did anyone advise you not to send this song, 14 songs to labels, or not really at that point?
I don't know that anyone knew we were doing it. I don't know. I just hadn't thought about it. I don't know. It seemed like a different thing. They all seemed really good to me. And so I thought, I don't know what I was thinking. Quite honestly, it seems like stupid now. It was a joke that my managers, he had given the tape in our conversation with him. This is like a Friday afternoon. He had given the tape to some other clients of his who were managers, who managed Joe Jackson, the B-52s, OMD, Danzig, a bunch of artists. And they wanted to meet with us too if we could stay around till Monday, if we wouldn't mind sticking around till Monday. So we were like, okay. So we hung out with friends in LA over the weekend and we went to meet with these guys on Monday. And, they were the real deal. They were incredible guys, Steve Jensen and Martin Kirkup. And what I realized after talking to them that afternoon, we went over there about lunchtime Monday, was that with these guys, we were either going to get signed or we weren't good enough. It wasn't a matter of, is anyone going to discover us? They could walk into any record company in the world and say, we've got this band. They had all the bands they had, which were about 10 different bands. All of them were signed. All of them were successful bands, different levels, but they were all legitimate, successful bands. So these guys, they can walk into any label they want. It's not like we have to wait for someone to find us. I remember walking across the street. Their office was on La Cienega and Santa Monica, and walked across the street to Barney's Beanery afterwards. And I was sitting there with Dave, and I thought, if we want to do this, we're going to get signed.
Yeah.
Or we're really not any good.
Right.
But it's not like no one's got to find us. Like, and by this time I was really loving playing in Counting Crows. I still really loved Himalayans too. But Counting Crows have been playing gigs. People have been packing in to see us. And I was really enjoying it.
What ended up happening is this huge bidding war, which was kind of unheard of for 14 songs as a double album demo.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, because the thing is, though, that if you have songs are a goldmine. The sound of your band might be great, and maybe that will pay off for a record company because maybe you'll be the next big thing next year. Although by the time you discover a band with a cool sound, if it's something that sounds like somebody else, by the time that record's done, that sound could be completely dated. But songs are songs. They're forever. A guy that can write 15 songs can write 15 more songs. You know what I mean? It's like I can see why they were excited about this, because that's one thing that doesn't get dated. Songwriting doesn't get dated. It just sounds do.
Sure.
The songs don't. So yeah, I still was planning on being in both bands for a while, but as stuff started, I realized after a while I couldn't do this and do Himalayans and do Sordid Humor, and I kind of had to bow out of everything else. Himalayans, we went in the studio and we recorded everything we had kind of live to 2-track and just to document it all. And then we stopped. It just started taking up more time.
And at a certain point, Gary Gersh ends up hearing this demo.
Gary signed us to DGC or Geffen, whatever it was. And he had a cool thing going on at Geffen. We signed with Geffen. There was a huge bidding war and millions of dollars on the table. Our advance for August and everything after was $15,000. So $3,000 each.
It's incredible.
That's all. I mean, other than money that went to making the record, but that's all we took home.
Now, you could have gotten a lot more, but you chose to have creative control over the record.
Yeah, we traded, in the negotiations, we traded all the money away for complete creative control and a higher royalty, kind of betting on ourselves in the long term.
Worked out pretty well.
It did. The thing about royalties is you got to pay everything back.
Right.
So if you get a big advance and a shitty royalty, you're going to owe all that money, and you can buy a new car, but you're going to owe them, and you don't owe them. It's like if you take $100 home and you sell $100 worth of records, that doesn't make you even. It's only wherever your royalty rate was. So if you're like on a 10% or a 15% royalty, that's $15 out of the 100. You got to sell 700 records. Is that right? Yeah, about 700 records to pay it off, the $100. You know, it's sort of shitty that way. So it seemed like getting a higher royalty was the long-term thing. And the creative control, the other thing was usually you get like one guaranteed record and then the record company has options on you. So they can choose to let you go or not. But we had 3 solid records. So they had to invest in us. And they had to like be patient. No matter what, we were going to get to make 3 albums with them.
Did the record start taking off right away? Because obviously we all know the story, August and everything after. 7 million records, one of the greatest records ever from that time period. But did the record start to happen right away, or did it take some time?
No, not at all. We had an argument about the single. Geffen wanted A Murder of One because it had that Jesus Jones drum beat. Boom, boom, cat, cat. It had that drum beat, you know, that was big right then. But it was too long. And they wanted us to edit it, and I didn't want to edit anything. And I wanted Mr. Jones, which I did not think was a hit. I thought Ranking was a hit. We all did. But you put introductory tracks out back then. So Mr. Jones seemed like a good introductory track. And because of the disagreement, we put out nothing. There was no single, no video. We just went on tour. We opened for Midnight Oil for a couple gigs. And then we went on a tour with, the headliner was Suede, and the middle band was the Cranberries, who blew up during the tour. Amazing. But Suede was already a really cool big band coming over from England. So we were like the opening band on that tour for a few months. And then we went and opened for Cracker for a few months. Then they were blowing up back then. It was their second record. They had some big hits. And, you know, the radio stations would come to all the shows because of the bands we were playing with, and they would talk to us after our set because they liked us, and then, what's your single? And we would lie and say Mr. Jones. And I guess, I mean, I don't know if the story's apocryphal or true, but the story I heard eventually is that at some point MTV called up. This has got to be 3 or 4. The record came out like in August or September, and this is it's right before Thanksgiving. And MTV calls up Geffen and says, where's the video for the Counting Crows single? And they said, what single? Which song? Which song? And they're like, what do you mean, which song? The hit, Mr. Jones. It can't be a true story because you would never hear somebody admit to not knowing what the song was. The record company would never have copped that. So I think my managers heard whatever happened, and then, or they talked to someone at MTV who told them, because we had our friends there. So we ended up like going home like on an overnighter, going back to LA in the middle of tour right before Thanksgiving. Instead of having a break at Thanksgiving, we went and made the Mr. Jones video. And our managers had the idea to put it out. Nothing gets released the week between Christmas and New Year's.
Sure.
There's no charts that week, so no one wants to put anything out because it's not going to chart. But they had the idea that we should give it to MTV that week because, no, there's no charts, but there's also nobody else giving them anything to play. So maybe they'll play it a bunch.
It's the only new music.
Yeah, so we gave them the song then. Meanwhile, like on that tour with Cracker, we had played Irving Plaza, and we had a great show opening for Cracker at Irving Plaza. And they actually pushed us back on stage to do an encore, which, you know, headlining bands never do.
Yeah.
And Marcy Klein, who was the booker for Saturday Night Live, was there. And so she saw us, and she ended up booking us to play Saturday Night Live after a lot of negotiation.
And that's kind of really what blew that song up for you. Yeah.
Because the record wasn't, we played Saturday Night Live like the second week of January in '94. The record wasn't even in the top 200. It was like 213. It was what they used to do that. They'd book people who weren't huge.
Yeah.
You know, they'd break bands.
Which would never happen now.
Right. No, I mean, but we played Saturday Night Live as our record. August was at number 213, I think. And we played Round Here first, as opposed to Mr. Jones. And I think that's what really broke the band, because we played the fuck out of it. It was a great version of Round Here. And the record jumped 40 spots a week for 5 or 6 weeks straight.
Started sounding like hotcakes.
Yeah, it did. It went and ended up like 6 weeks later, it was at number 2 or
Incredible.
Number 6. So it was really Saturday Night Live that blew the record up. But that was 3-4 months after the record had come out. by the spring of '94, the record was number 2 for
Amazing.
like the next year or two.
Also, talk to me about the musical climate back then, because obviously Geffen was known, to have Nirvana, Sonic Youth. So, were you friends with those bands? Did you have any camaraderie? Were you hanging out at all with Kurt and the guys?
Yeah,
we talked about it for a bit.
That was the reason we kind of went to Geffen. Aside from that, they let us get the contract we wanted. They were also kind of a boutique label. They had Teenage Fan Club, the Sundays, the Posies, Nirvana, Sonic Youth. Gary also signed Peter Gabriel, Ricky Lee Jones. That end of Geffen that he was running, kind of the DGC side of things, was really cool. Right after that, Beck was signed by Tony Berg there when he was our A&R guy. They had a really cool indie records thing going on. And it was also a little like a campfire where like everybody hung out together. Maria McKee was on it too. She was kind of one of my idols. I loved her. And
when you met Nirvana, were you like, this band's going to be huge? Did you know that?
No, they were already huge.
They already heard you
because they blew up in 91 or 92, and we got signed in 92. Yeah. We got signed in 92. The record came out in 93.
Yeah.
So their In Utero came out a few months before August did. So the first album had already, Nevermind had already been, not the first album, it was their second album, but it was already their first major label record. It was already huge. And we all they had like barbecue over at Gary's house, and we met like Thurston Moore was there, and I feel like Chris and Dave were there, and the guys from the Posies. It was all Maria's band. It was really cool. We got to know. Maria ends up singing on a bunch of stuff on August and everything after. I
must have been an amazing time.
Yeah, I met Kurt back then over at Danny Goldberg's house, and he let me come hang out backstage when they opened. The first show of the In Utero tour was at I want to say it was the San Francisco Civic, and he let me come hang out backstage, and it was really cool. But then those guys were all they were really nice. Everyone was really like. And we were all on this kind of cool little indie label together, blowing up.
So there was a camaraderie back then with some of those bands, I guess.
I thought so. I felt very much like part of the coolest club I could imagine. Because we had barbecues.
Yeah.
I went over, the first record I'm on is actually Maria's record, because I go into this, George DeCoulius, who is one of the guys we were thinking about to produce August, was producing Maria, and he asked me to come in and sing on a cover of I Wish I Was Your Mother, the Mott the Hoople tune with Maria. And then I ended up singing on a few songs. She did the song for the Sweet Relief benefit for Victoria Williams. And her and I are the two vocals on the song Opelousas Sweet Relief, and those are the first two things I ever did that got put out before our record, so it was kind of like this hang where you just kind of got to know everybody. It was very cool.
Did you think, that a song like Mr. Jones was going to have the success that it did early on?
Well, no, and it didn't really. It didn't. Like I said, they were playing it on the radio. It was enough for MTV to want a video, but they played that on 120 minutes at 1 a.m, like on a Sunday night. It wasn't like it was getting blasted every day. The song, that's why, the funny thing about it is the memory is that Mr. Jones is our big hit. But Mr. Jones was just the radio song. Round Here is what blew us up.
Yeah.
And I thought that might do it, because Round Here is different from everything else. So if you're going to go on stage at Saturday Night Live and play a song, that's the one to play. It's also the one we played on Letterman when we played Letterman after that. It was never Mr. Jones that we played on any of these TV shows. Although we did play Mr. Jones at the 1:45 slot on Saturday Night Live that night. Or the 12:40, I can't remember what it was, 12:45. But it was really Round Here. I thought Mr. Jones was a great song. But Round Here is not like anything else. And it was like, it's powerful, and it made a real impression when we played it. And it blew us up, like through the roof. And then after that, all the stations will play Mr. Jones because it's shorter. And Round Here's kind of long to play on the radio.
The story of Mr. Jones is about you dreaming to be a rock star. It's a great story about Marty Jones, your old bass player, and talking about that night. And I think it was like Chris Isaacs. Was it his bass player or his drummer? Yeah, he was in the corner there somewhere.
We were, Marty's dad just passed away a few years ago, David Serva. He's one of the few Americans to ever go to Madrid and make it in the flamenco scene. He's a great guitar player, like incredible guitar player. And he had left I don't know, 20 years before that and moved to Madrid. And he was a big star in the flamenco scene in Madrid. But he had come home for a visit, and he was playing some gigs in the Mission in San Francisco with his flamenco troupe. So Marty and I went to hang out at the gig, and it was incredible. And we went out afterwards with all the people in the flamenco troupe, dancers, drummers, percussionists, whatever. And I just got wasted that night. A bunch of different bars all through San Francisco with all these kind of older flamenco musicians. And the last bar we ended up in was called the New Amsterdam. It's on Columbus.
Sure.
And in the corner of the bar was Kenny Dale Gilmore is his name? Kenny Dale Johnson, I think, is Chris Isaac's drummer. And Chris Isaac was the hottest band in San Francisco right then. They were this big. They get famous with these kind of beautiful ballads, but they were the hot rockabilly, like Stray Cats-ish kind of band at the time. Blistering band. And he's in the corner, and it's funny because Marty and I had been talking about, like, we tried to talk to a couple of the flamenco dancers, and they just weren't having any of us, like they just weren't impressed by these two kids.
They're like, where's Chris Isaac?
Yeah, I mean, and in the corner is Kenny with it seems like he's at a table with 3 women in my memory, which again might be inflated at this point. But I remember saying to Marty, man, we got to get our careers together, because if we were like that, girls would talk to us, Yeah. And I thought that was kind of funny when I thought about it later, so I wrote a song about it. But it's very much, the song it's about dreaming about being a rock star, but it's also about how silly and hollow that dream is, because the guy keeps saying, when everybody loves me, I'll never be lonely, which is the line you're supposed to see through. I mean, clearly it's not, life doesn't work that way. It was kind of I have to say I nailed it. Like, I mean, that is exactly.
And strangely enough, it happened to you. So the record goes on to sell, as I mentioned, like 7 million records. Was it hard to adjust when everyone's recognizing you at that point? I mean, you went on tour, but I mean, at that point, the record really started to blow up. So was it hard to adjust to that life for you?
Well, it was kind of weird. It sort of happened. We were out of the country when it happened. We had taken this trip. Our first tour of Europe was in the month of April of '94. And although the record had been blowing up all during these months, not in such a way that would make it hard to go anywhere. But we made the video at that point for Round Here, which was the second one we released. And we went off to Europe to do our first European tour. And we came back a month later. While we were over in Europe, Kurt died.
Which was tough for
Rolling
everyone.
Stone had come to interview me in Paris. And I was very nervous about being on the cover of Rolling Stone. It's hard to describe it to people now, but there were newsstands back then on every street corner in every city in America. And there would be a huge rack of Rolling Stones, and there'd be like 10 versions of your face. And you would be everywhere, omnipresent, if you're on the cover of Rolling Stone. And I was really nervous about what that would be like. And the morning I met the guys in Paris, the Mark Seliger and David Wild, was the morning I heard that Kurt died. Gary called me from California when they discovered, or from Seattle when they found his body. He was kind of someone I looked up to, but also someone that seemed a lot like me. Kurt had clearly a lot of emotional problems and some mental illness difficulties. I wasn't doing drugs anymore, but I felt very similar to him, just a couple years behind. So that was pretty scary, finding that out right before we talked to Rolling Stone. When we got home from that tour, we flew straight from London to New Orleans. We were playing a gig during Jazz Fest at Tipitina's. And I had been going to Jazz Fest for years and loving it. Loved New Orleans. And I went to the festival the first day we got there and got mobbed. That had never happened before. Everything had changed, but I had been out of the country for it and I hadn't really realized it. So we landed back in America, and I immediately got mobbed. We played.
Was it scary for you, or was it?
Yeah, because it felt like it wouldn't stop. It just people surrounded me wanting autographs and pictures, and it wouldn't. I couldn't get away. I didn't know what to do. It was, and you're in it was the worst place for it to happen, because you're in the middle of this massive field with several 100,000 people at the jazz festival. It's not the place to discover that you're famous. Yeah, because there is no
way out.
You're surrounded by people.
Although I feel like that was before selfies, so maybe they
but people had cameras,
right?
They had cameras, which just takes even longer.
Yeah.
It's like, so it was hard to get away. So that was weird. And then we played Tipitina's the next night, and Tipitina's fits about 800 or 900 people, but there were 2,000 or 3,000 people outside on the neutral ground. They had to open the walls to the gig so people could hear outside, and it was thousands of people out there. Dave Bryson and I went out and played for them afterwards.
Amazing.
But we were suddenly huge, and like everything had changed, and I didn't have time to adjust because it happened while we were out of the country, and I just got caught completely by surprise.
And you get home and people are sleeping on your lawn in Berkeley, right? It's probably really off-putting in a sense, right?
It was really strange. That summer I had booked this tour. You know, my favorite artists always brought along the artists they loved to open for them, you know, like different kinds of bands, obscure, interesting music. So I had booked this tour with bands coming in and out every couple weeks. Like I had, you know, grunge, like rock bands like Buffalo Tom from Boston. I had bluegrass bands like the Cox Family, a 3-generation bluegrass band from northern Louisiana. I had the Soul Rebels brass band, a brass band from New Orleans. So many different kinds of music, people playing with us. Alex Chilton opening for us that summer. All kinds of different stuff. And our audiences before that were people who had discovered us and sought us out. They wanted to hear every song on the record. They were really they worked at record stores and shit like that. That's the kind of people they were. They worked at record stores. They listened to college radio.
Music geeks.
Yeah, they were all music geeks. Yeah. So the concerts were really fun. All of a sudden, it was a lot of people who just wanted to hear Mr. Jones or Around Here. And they hated our opening bands. And they were terrible to them. Wow. Like really rude and shitty. And they just didn't want to hear a bluegrass band. And they didn't. And Alex would just antagonize them. And so I was always out in the audience watching the opening bands. So by the time I went on stage every night that summer, I was so angry at the audience because they would be so rude and shitty to my friends and these great bands.
Did it make you not want to play Mr. Jones at some point? Because
it just made me want to kill him. Right. I almost got in fights some nights out in the audience. It was a stressful summer because I would go on stage just like furious at the audience every night, which is not the attitude you want to have.
Yeah.
So I had a really hard time that summer. It was brutal.
And I was going to say about 95 or so, you end up moving to LA. You get this call from Sal and Johnny Depp, you know, who at that point have the Viper Room. And they're like, because I guess it was getting fairly tough for you to be in Oakland, right, in Berkeley.
Well, yeah, they called me one day. They wanted to invite me to a party they were having. It was early January or sometime in January of 95, I think. You can look it up. It's whenever Kate Moss's birthday is.
How was that, by the way? I'm sure that was incredible.
It was really fun. But they called me, and after a couple minutes on the phone, they're like, wait, what's wrong? I told them what had happened, that like I couldn't go. I had just gotten home from the last tour. I'd been home for like 2 or 3 weeks maybe. I just couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't leave the house, couldn't go to shop for groceries. There were people camped out on my lawn. And they put me on hold for a minute. And when they came back, it was Sal and Johnny, and Sal, one of them just said, okay, we've got you a room at the Backlash, which is the hotel right behind the Viper Room. And we've got you, you have a reservation on the 7 o'clock flight. Someone will pick you up at the airport. Just get out of there. You got to get out of there. And so I went down. It turned out that what they were calling me about was Kate Moss's 21st birthday. They were having a party that night. They were closing the Viper Room. And they were having a party at the club. And they wanted to invite me. I'm pretty sure I met Josh Richmond that night. It was the weirdest thing. I'd never been to anything like that kind of.
But you just became famous too, and here you are at Kate Moss's birthday.
Yeah, so. But I'm not in the club really. I've been famous, but I've also been on the road the whole time, so I don't know anybody, and I'm not like really in the club, yet. I haven't been going to award shows or anything like that. Mm-hmm. And then I'm at a party, in the 90s when they really had supermodels. There were like 8 of them that were the most famous women in the world.
Naomi, Cindy.
Elle Macpherson. Yeah. And they're all in this little club that night. It was so weird. I'm almost certain I met Josh that night at the Viper Room.
At that point, you're like, I'm moving to LA. That's it.
Yeah. Well, I kind of did. I just didn't go home. I was so tired of being somewhere where it was like an issue wherever I was. And it just like nobody cared in LA. I mean, it was kind of the difference between going from a struggling artist town to a working artist town. Like in this great struggling artist town I'd come to, it had a great music scene that I really loved. People came out to see bands, but when you blew up from there, everybody resented you. Whereas in LA, everyone was about working and they just wanted to know what you were doing next and they appreciated it. And it was like, it was just really cool and nobody cared. I mean, Jack Nicholson's going to walk down the street, so who cares about me? Right. You know, so I felt comfortable there. I specifically felt comfortable in the Viper Room because I knew everybody that worked there, not just people that hung out there. I knew the people that worked there. And so it was always okay to be me there. And nobody bugged me.
It's weird because I feel like I was hanging out there a bunch, but I don't remember you bartending there. Were you bartending there every night?
Pretty much.
I guess I just didn't pay attention to what was going on around me. But that's a pretty incredible story, right? Because everyone's coming into the bar and it's like Tom Petty and Ginsberg and everyone. And you're like, what? How did that happen?
Well, I just Shannon McManus was like the manager there at the time, and her and I had become really good friends. And she mostly worked the downstairs bar in the little room downstairs. And it was just less crowded on her side of the bar. So I would hang out, and she's the only person I really knew. So I would hang out on the other side of the bar with her, and I would help out, get beers and stuff. And I guess at some point she had to go to the bathroom, and she's like, can you handle the cash register? And I said, sure. And while she was gone, I made a fucking $1 million in tips because I browbeat people for tips. And then I made her so much money that she's like, you got to do this. I was standing on that side of the bar every night anyways because it was less crowded and I was more comfortable. I was very shy and I didn't know how to hang out in a bar anyways, but I could hang out behind the bar. I had something to do with my hands. I had something to do, and I was with my friend Shannon or Johnny Carco or wherever I was, in the bar. It was just kind of a place where I was comfortable and like where everybody knew me and there wasn't any expectations or I was just accepted. So I would just go there every night. And I mean, I didn't have a real job because I wasn't getting paid, right. But I worked there every night anyways, just because it was where I wanted to be.
Did you get starstruck when Ginsberg came in or Patty at that point? Or were you just like, these are just regular people?
Yeah, it was really weird.
Yeah.
It was, but it was great too. I mean, I was an English major. This is Allen Ginsberg. We're eating Mexican food together.
Must have been surreal.
William Burroughs comes in. The Hughes brothers had just directed like Dead Presidents, I think. It was just all these really interesting, cool people. Like I just met my peers, that's what they were. They were my peers. They were just like me and they were doing interesting things. I was really good friends. I had been really good friends right before that because I'd met them at gigs over the course. The only other people I knew in LA were Randall and Sean Penn and Robert Downey. Those are my two other friends.
Just a couple. Well, aside from Randall, the other people, just a couple actors.
Well, Sean had come backstage at a gig at the Roxy and come backstage to talk to me and wanted me to do some writing for a movie. And we just became friends. And one night he called me up and said, no, this was later. I guess I met Robert a little bit later because I remember I met Sean during that tour because I ended up working on The Crossing Guard. But he called me one night after I'd first moved to LA and said, hey, what are you doing? You doing anything tonight? And I was like, I'm gonna get together with some of my high school friends. Do you want to come hang out? And I said, sure. So he picked me up. He had this do you remember those Chrysler make them Grand Nationals? They look like a regular car, but they had an engine the size of a jet in them. Yeah. And so I lived in Laurel Canyon up on Lookout Mountain. And he picked me up at my house and he said, we're going to go to my friend's house in Malibu. And we somehow made it to Malibu. It seemed like 15 minutes later. He was going about 1,000 miles an hour in this car. He had this guy, the Reverend, who hung out with him. It was me and him and the Rev. And we go to this house in Malibu and walk in the door and it's like Emilio Estevez and Robert Downey Jr. It was like basically the Brat Pack, like hanging out at a house.
That's what LA is like, by the way. All that kind of weird stuff happens there.
Yeah. But they were kids he'd gone to high school with, you know. His dad and Robert's dad were both directors in the 60s and 70s. And like Emilio's dad's obviously Martin Sheen.
Sure.
They just were hanging out together. And Robert and I really hit it off that night too. So we became really good friends for a long. I haven't seen either of those guys in years. But
that must have been amazing times.
Yeah, man. They were really talented, brilliant people. Like I was playing the Beacon Theater at one point during that August tours, and we were staying at the Paramount. And Sean called me and said, "Hey, I want to show you this movie I made, and I want you to write the closing song for it." And so I said, "Okay." He picked me up and I think we went to the Brill Building. They have a lot of screening rooms there. And me, him, and Marlon Brando watched this movie,
Just a few
The
people.
Crossing Guard, together.
Right.
And when it was over, Marlon said, "I think that's the best movie anyone's made in 25 years. It was so good." And I wrote Miller's Angels for that movie.
Sure.
But it went through like 2 years of hell with Harvey Weinstein, who just put Sean through hell, making him re-edit it over and over and over and over again. I finally got so frustrated with Harvey that I pulled my song off the movie. He ended up with a Springsteen song on the end of it. But that movie, the movie that came out was really good. It's a really good movie. But the first version that I saw about a year and a half before that is still one of the best films I've ever seen. It was flawless, like a classic movie. I realize that's a weird thing about seeing movies before they're actually completely finished, is that they disappear forever.
Yeah.
Those that moment of that movie I'll never be able to see it that way again.
Well, the second record ends up coming out, goes to #1. And one of my favorite songs, obviously, Angels of the Silences, probably your heaviest song, and a masterpiece. So did you get did you get kind of self-conscious from there was a little bit of backlash with that second record, right? Because people were kind of, as you said, they love you, and then you become too popular. And all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, I love this band, they're so popular, but they're too popular, I don't want to like them anymore.
Yeah, I don't think it was a little bit of backlash. There was, by the time Recovering the Satellites came out, it was I thought we were making this great record that was the record company had really wanted us to make August and Everything After, or After August and Everything After. They just wanted
September After.
They wanted us to work with T-Bone Burnett again and make another album that's reminded them of the Byrds or something. And we ended up working with Gil Norton, who'd made all the Pixies records, because I knew these songs like Catapult and Angels of the Silences that's not what they didn't need to sound like the Byrds. They needed someone who could make a Pixies record, And I thought we made this really brave record that was a huge leap forward from August and very different, not resting on our laurels at all. And it just got nothing. It was like, I remember it came out, it was #1 the week it came out, but it was buried in the back of the review section in Rolling Stone. They didn't even give it the lead review. It was just buried. And they gave it a pretty good review, but
what was the backlash about at that point? You think just because you had become too popular with Mr. Jones and things like that?
Yeah, I mean,
7 million records and
you got to remember how radio is. Like, radio just wants to sell ad dollars. So they play something over and over and over and over again if it's going to work, if that's what people want to hear. There's no reason for them to care, but they do not care that people are sick of you are going to get sick of you, because why should they? It's not their business, So they just play and play and play. And, after a while, you get tired of songs in a way that you don't now with streaming. You got tired of songs with radio. With really popular songs started to annoy the shit out of you after a while when I was growing up, because they would just play them to death, and you couldn't escape from them.
Or if the video was played too much on TV, I guess that would happen too.
But also, the thing is, like, music is different from other art forms. We literally wear it on our shirts. Like, we proclaim who we are. There's nothing in our lives that we do like this except for sports. But that has a lot to do with just where you grow up with sports. But music, we choose to portray ourselves on our t-shirts. This is who I am. This is my gang. This is what I love. These are the people I'm like. This is my personal cool, And that's great when you're the one discovering it. But then when that band you love becomes so big that you have to talk about them at the water cooler with that guy you hate,
right.
The guy who likes all the worst music, but now he likes your band.
It's too commercial.
It's not cool anymore.
Yeah.
And you get tired. It's just human nature to get tired of stuff like that.
Yeah.
There are very few bands that survive getting that big. Probably the only one that I can think of that's completely Teflon in my lifetime was REM, because they had 5 or 6 indie albums before they ever signed to Warner Brothers.
Sure.
They were on IRS for 15 years or 10 years. So they had a long career of being so cool that you couldn't get mad at them for getting big. We were all just happy, But everybody else, you get tired of them. Even Springsteen, people got tired of it.
True. That's very true.
They got tired of Born in the USA, and it just really happened to us. It could have been worse. I think we were really lucky in that because we didn't try to remake that first album, that even though we got a huge amount of backlash, you couldn't really point to, you weren't tired of the music when you did get a chance to listen to it. But I think we spent the next 10 years without getting really good reviews, or reviews that were about women I dated instead of the gigs we played or the records we made. They were about all this stuff that was kind of like dismissive. It wasn't until Saturday nights and Sunday mornings, so that's like 2007. Yeah, it's about 10 years later that we start getting reviews that are talking about the music again. Because for Desert Life, Recovering the Satellites, and Hard Candy, it was all just about like fame and kind of dismissive responses to fame.
Tell me the story behind A Long December. It's a great story and actually becomes one of your most successful songs at this point. So tell me how that came about.
My friend Jen got hit by a car like around Halloween of that year, 95. And it just trashed the left side of her body. And so she ended up in the hospital for a long time. And like the first day, she was in surgery for about 24 hours, and a bunch of us came down to hang out. And her mother had flown in from Providence. And we were all sitting in this room. And her mother said, "I'm going to stay here tonight. So I'll be here when she wakes up. I'll stay all night. But I'm going to have to go home tomorrow to shower and stuff and get some sleep." I didn't know Jen that well. I just kind of knew her through a couple friends of mine, but not really closely. But I went down to the hospital, you know. And so she's like, "Who can be here tomorrow during the day?"
But you didn't have a day job, so you
right.
Yeah.
I was making a record, so right. Everybody's like, "I'll be there tomorrow night. I got to work." You know, everyone. It was a crowded room. It was like a bunch of her friends, but also like Courtney Cox and Matthew Perry, who were really close to Jen. And they all had to do stuff the next day. And I'm sitting there in a room full of people. Her mother has been up for 24 hours already and is going to stay up all night. And she just needs someone to say they'll be there during the day the next day. And so I was like, I can do it. I don't have to be there anywhere till like dinner time or the afternoon. And she's like, "Okay, can you come around 10 a.m.? Like, yeah, I'll be here." And then I started hanging out with Jen, and I was the only guy who could be there during the day. So I would spend all my days with her, and we got really close. I mean, you kind of bond through stuff like that. I brought in a VCR, and we watched like Pride and Prejudice, the BBC thing. I know her. She told me years later, because she's one of my closest friends in the world now. She told me years later, her mother was like, "That guy Adam is such a nice guy. How do you know him?" And she's like, "Yeah, I don't really know him that well. He's been hanging out, but he's nice, Like, I think they thought I was really fucking weird at the time.
Also, you wrote this amazing song about her, so that.
Well, I ended up like spending a lot of time in the hospital, and we were making Recovering the Satellites right then. And I would go to the hospital during the day. And then I would show up to the studio around 3 or 4 o'clock and work until 11 or 12. And then I would go to the Viper Room till they closed. So it was kind of busy. And this one night I had been at the Viper Room till about 2. We cleaned up, so a little later. And I went up to Samantha Mathis and Tracy Falco's house, which they lived on Hillside, so we called it Hillside Manor. And I spent a couple hours with them. And I think Christian Slater and Jude Law were there too. It was like the 5 of us hanging out. And then I went home.
By the way, what was your life like? Everyone you knew at that point was like uber
Well, everyone
famous.
was working.
Yeah.
I met Samantha because she was making a thing called Love, and the music supervisor on a thing called Love was T-Bone. And that was while we were making the first album, and he was supervising the music for that movie. So I had met her in River Phoenix while we were making August and Everything After. They were famous. I was not.
Yeah.
I was just a guy making a record, which is how I knew them. It may have been Randall there that night too. I can't remember. But I went home about 4 in the morning, and I wrote the song. It just kind of wrote itself between 4 and 6 a.m. Got up the next day, went to the hospital. Well, on the way to the hospital, I stopped at Geffen, and I played the song for Tony Berg, who's then my A&R guy, on his piano in his office. And then I went to the hospital. And then I showed up at the studio about 4, I played the song for the guys before dinner. Then we had dinner, and I taught them the song, and then we played it. And it's like take 6 is the one that's on the record. It's a total live take. So we were I went back in and laid the background vocals, like one track of one vocal and one track of the other harmony, just the harmonies on the nanas and on the verses. But there's no, other than that, there's no overdubbing on that song. It's just a completely live take with the band playing live. And then I got off like 10 or 11. I drove over to the Viper Room and played it for the guys in the Viper Room. And
when you write a song like that, you have to know how good it is. I mean, it's such an incredible song, and it's so impactful even to this day.
yeah, I thought it was a perfect song. I thought it was like, there was something, I still think it's probably the most perfect piece of music I've ever written. There's just something, I don't know, gem-like
Magical.
about it.
Yeah.
It just works. It's simple, but it's very emotional and kind of galvanizing too. It's a sad song, but it's also about hope. It just works. I knew when I wrote it, it was like perfect. I don't know if it's the best song I've ever written, but there's something, like we tour, we play a million shows. There is nothing, almost nothing that I want to play every night. There's no song I don't get tired of, except that one.
Yeah.
I don't know why that is, but for some reason I am never, there's never a night I don't want to play it. And that's not true of anything else. Every other song we give breaks because I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
Just like there's a certain night you don't want to play Mr. Jones. And it happens for every song because you're just like, it's just too much to play the same thing. Who wants to play the same shit every night? I mean, I know a lot of people do, but I don't.
It's almost a Christmas anthem at this point too.
Isn't that weird?
It's crazy.
It kind of has become one in the last,
it has.
just in the last few years.
Yeah.
It's sort of become, well, it's also like a weird meme-ish kind of thing. Like what's a Christmas movie and what's not. Let's argue about Die Hard, right. Which is like in a culture that's obsessed with being able to say something in like one picture with one thing, like a meme. Those kinds of discussions have weight.
Yeah.
And so things become Christmas songs too, I think.
Definitely.
Although it's just, it has a winterish feel to it, and it is about hope and the new year coming. So a lot of the things that go on at Christmas are encapsulated in that song, which is why it was written about it too.
Today would be a good day to listen to with the snowstorm.
It would be great, yeah.
Let's talk about 2021, Butter Miracle, a great record. We were just talking about it. Sweet 1, and I think there's a Sweet 2 coming.
Well, it won't be Sweet 2. I'm calling it Sweet Tooth.
Sweet 2. Okay.
It's not a sweet. It's the other half that we're going in to record in a few weeks.
Amazing.
Here in New York. So hopefully finish it up. But I think it'll end up being side A too. It's the other half of it though. We've got five or six songs for it. I probably pick 4 or 5 of them. Yeah, Butter Miracle was weird. I was spending a lot of time on a friend of mine on his farm in England, and I had been spending a lot of time out there by myself, like no one around for miles, and just me and his dogs. Sometimes he was there, sometimes he wasn't, and I would just wander from literally over hill and dale with these dogs. And I had set a piano up in this room he had, and I was just playing, and I hadn't really played much piano in a while, like in a few months really. I hadn't written anything in at least a year, I think. And I wrote this song about the farm, the tall grass. And I thought I finished it, but I came back the next day and I was playing it, and I started messing around with the end of the song, and I sang this line. I changed the chords and sang this line. Bobby was a kid from around the town, and I thought, oh, that sounds really good. Maybe this is a longer song like Palisades Park that has several movements to it, But when I worked on it for a little while longer, I realized that this was a different song, not a longer version. It wasn't a long tail on that song. It was a different song. It's Elevator Boots. But I was really kind of struck by how cool it was that it flowed right out of the tall grass like it was the same song. And I thought, what if I write a series of songs that all are born one out of the other, like so that the end of one song kind of gives birth to the next song, like a suite of music, like the second half of Abbey Road or the first side of The Wild, the Innocent, the E Street Shuffle, like one of those kind of records. And so I got really excited about that. Seemed like a real challenge. And that was the first time I'd kind of been excited about writing in a little while. I think I'd kind of gotten sort of down on it, on making records. Butter Miracle was born out of that. I just wanted to try and write a suite of music. The kind of the compositional challenge was really exciting. And the weird thing about it was you didn't know it worked. even when we were recording it, there was no way to tell until the way we recorded it was we would finish each song. When we were playing them, we would play into the next song for a couple lines and then stop. So we knew that it flowed, but we weren't playing 20 minutes of music and then trying to like record the whole thing, like we were doing them one song at a time, but playing into the next song. So you weren't really sure it worked until we were mixing it and we actually snipped them all together. And, which is a long time to carry an idea in your head and in your imagination. Like it's probably almost a year from when I had written it to when we finished the recording. Because we also got hit with the pandemic, which called the recording sessions to a rather abrupt halt right in the middle. We were about 80% done with the record when the country got closed down.
So the new record will be the same concept, kind of a flowing, almost like one long song in a sense.
No,
it won't be.
not.
Okay.
It's just separate songs.
Separate songs.
I tried to write it that way at first, but then I felt like I was forcing it. These songs didn't call for it the way those other ones did. And I guess I could have made it work, but it felt like I was making it work. And it felt, as I was writing musical sections to try and tie them together, it just felt forced. And I thought, well, I had already decided to call it Sweet One and Sweet Tooth, just for the hell of it. And so I thought, well, it's Sweet Tooth, not Sweet Two, so it doesn't really have to flow together. So I decided not to make it because it felt very forced.
And that'll come out when? Do you think maybe the summer? We don't know.
No, I don't know.
We don't know.
You never know with this. Because it's when you're making creative things, when they're done, they're done.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the record company has to take a year to put it out or whatever they take.
Yeah. One last thing we got to talk about, Accidentally Love, one of your biggest songs, obviously. Tell me about how that came about. Do you have a favorite Shrek character, by the way? Is there a favorite? I never watched Shrek that much growing up, but was there a character that you just really were like, this is my character?
No, but I thought they were all great. Like the whole concept of like fairy tale stuff and characters coming to life, the weird little gingerbread guy, the whole thing I thought was pretty brilliant. But also I've always wanted to do a song like that. Like I love doing stuff for movies. I mean, no, let's put this way. I love the idea of collaborating on a movie. Working with film companies is a nightmare. Right. It's like there's a lot more money than music and a lot more people involved, and it's a hassle. But like what those songs from those things last forever. It's the only part of our culture that way that really is timeless. Like my grandmother saw Snow White. My mother saw Snow White. I saw Snow White. If I have kids, they'll probably see Snow White at some point. Like that stuff lasts forever. And the music from it too, someday my prince will come. Miles Davis did a cover of that. That stuff is really timeless.
Like The Graduate.
Yeah. But especially those animated kids movies. I love the idea of music well integrated in movies is brilliant, but specifically those Disney movies, Pixar kind of movies, that stuff is really timeless and it lasts forever. So having music that's a part of it, it's different from other things, and so I got a call from, the people at DreamWorks, and they brought me down to Amblin Studios, Spielberg's place.
Sure.
And they, walked me through the whole movie, really. They showed me most of it, and where they didn't have the movie done yet, they showed me storyboards and talked me through it. And they showed me the scene that they wanted it for, which at the time had that Weezer song, Holiday.
Sure.
I can't remember what it's called. Yeah, something like that. Holiday in the Sun, is that what it's called? On it.
Island in the Sun?
Island in the Sun, yeah. Was that was in the temp, that was the temp track for it. And so I took home a DVD copy of it with a lot of lines across it so that I couldn't, sell it to the world.
Because you would do that.
Well, yeah, almost certainly, yeah. And I worked on it. I had just moved to New York. I had a fourth floor walk up. We were building my place then, so I had a fourth floor walk up, like on the southwest corner of Washington Square, right at McDougal and 4th. And I just started working on this song. And for the longest time, I got nowhere. I couldn't seem to crack it, like what it wanted, like something that felt like good to me and that it was heartfelt, and then something that worked and was up tempo enough to work for like a movie like Shrek that was fun, because it's not really my wheelhouse. And I'd been stuck on it for a few months, and I was right on the verge of calling them and saying, I think you should find somebody else. I'm not getting this. And I got it. I got like the first half of it done. We were just leaving for tour in Europe, so I finished the last part of it in a hotel room in Liverpool, I think, or Manchester, or both of them. I don't know. But I finally got it. And then we ended up recording it in London. It was a really cool recording session because we did it over the phone, kind of hard, over the internet / phone with the director in Burbank at their studios. Because we recorded a version of it, and then it was like, it doesn't really work over the film when we're looking at it together. Okay, what if we try an acoustic version in the opening part? So we recorded like an acoustic intro that, like, if you listen to the version you hear on the radio is different from the version in the movie because it needed an acoustic version to open it before the band kicked in, because the visually. And so we were really like working on all this on the fly with the director. And it was very early days of that kind of internet work. Like, I remember hearing a story about Michael Jackson recording a record with people in different countries. And it was like, oh, wild. You know, and there was that kind of thing, because in order to time it and make it work right with the animation on the screen, we had to like make a bunch of adjustments of how we were playing in the studio. That were very like complex and challenging, and it made it a lot of fun. And we did it over there, and everybody in the end, they loved it, and it turned out great. I'm really happy with that song because it is a very hard song for me to write. It's just not my wheelhouse, and the fact that I managed to get a lot of the difficulties I was having with a relationship that was maybe with the wrong person, who just didn't work, even though we were really into it. We really loved each other, but it just didn't work. And make that match this relationship in a cartoon with the, like, well, he's an ogre and I'm a princess, so now we're both ogre. You know, like, that, because it could have been really stupid, and I think it's really buoyant and kind of joyous, but also captures the difficulty that was important to me.
A couple of Grammy nominations, so it definitely worked for sure.
Hey, I will say this: we lost more awards on that song than anything else we've ever put out. We got nominated for a million things and won absolutely none of them. Which,
well, you should have won, if I had my say. So.
Mostly, it doesn't bother me because I've always kind of hated award shows.
Yeah.
I never really went to any. The first award show I think I ever went to where we were nominated for something was the Golden Globes for "Accidentally in Love." You can't get me to go to the Grammys for any reason. Like that, I'm never doing. But
that's a whole nother podcast we're going to do.
I was told that if I wanted to win the Oscar, I needed to be there for the Golden Globes. And those seem like fun anyways.
Yeah.
So I went to the Oscars and the Golden Globes and lost both of them.
Well, you should have won. Well, let's talk about the tour coming up, Santana. It actually was just announced today, which is pretty exciting. So by the time the show comes out, a few weeks from now, but I think it starts in June, if I'm not mistaken. So. And you go all around the States. So you've done a few gigs with Santana, you mentioned, right?
We did a European tour about 15 years ago that was so much fun. Just because as a kid, they were one of those bands that I was really obsessed with because they were really, like they were so creative and improvisational on stage. Like I camped out as a kid in front of several venues to get front row to Santana. Like there were a couple venues in Berkeley that had GA front 2, 3, 4 rows, the Greek Theater and Zellerbach in the early days.
Yeah.
And I got in the front rows for 2 Santana shows by sleeping overnight in front of the venue, which that could never happen nowadays. They would never do that kind of GA thing in the front. But so I was really obsessed with that band. So to get to go on tour with them and have them still be like, even though they've had pop hits, they're still the same kind of like, the drummer back then was Dennis Chambers, like the P-Funk drummer. It was crazy who was in that band. And Immer and I would sit on the back of the stage every night on the drum risers, behind the drummers, talk to the drummers while they're playing.
Amazing.
And then I ended up, Carlos is like, do you want to sing on a song? And I was like, well, I loved that song Open Invitation when I was a kid. He's like, we'll learn it. And so I sang on that. And then like night by night, I ended up on more and more songs playing. I'm a pretty good percussion player.
Amazing.
Or tambourine player. And I ended up on like half the set by the end of the tour, which is, I cannot do that anymore. I'm too old to sing on half a set every night. But it was really a great tour because I just ended up joining Santana basically for a summer or whatever it was in Europe. It was really cool.
I think the tour kicks off June 14th in Florida. It takes you all the way through August. So that's exciting. Definitely want to come out to one of those shows. At the end of the show, Adam, we didn't get, we can do a part 2 to this because there's so much, we didn't get into your cooking show. We didn't get into your love of other bands, but we do this top 5 that's really fun and people seem to really like it, this viral moments here. And I know you're a huge foodie, as am I. So your top 5 favorite New York City restaurants, Adam Duritz, starting with number 5.
Oh, I don't have these in any kind of order.
No particular order.
Let's see. let's see. Il Posto Accanto. I was just there the other night. It's just a couple blocks away, actually.
Sure.
It's on 2nd and B, I guess.
Yeah.
I love Il Posto Accanto. I think it's fantastic. Emilio's Bellato.
Yeah.
That might be my
classic.
favorite restaurant in New York. That Anthony is the most incredible chef. Anthony Vitolo. He's unbelievable. That restaurant.
Are you in the back room or are you in the main room?
It depends on the night. If we have more people, we go to the back room.
Okay.
But we, for years, went there, like, tried to go every Sunday. It was like our Sunday night out with friends.
Emilio's great too. He's like he's like a gangster. Yeah.
I wish he liked me more. Sometimes I feel like
I don't know either.
He disapproves. He scares the shit out of me.
And the dad, you know.
One night. Oh, I thought you mean the son. I mean the father, Emilio.
Oh, I mean
Emilio's a great guy.
Emilio's,
son, I know. And his dad's great. Like, my friends all know his dad for years. But like, one time I went there and I had called ahead to Anthony to see if we could get in, and I went in the door, and they don't let any reservations. But I figured I knew the cook. I know the chef, and he said, what are you doing? I'm like, well, Anthony said I could come in early. He said I could come in, and he'd get us a table. He's like, Anthony?
Who's that?
Does Anthony look like he owns a fucking restaurant? Does Anthony look like the father in this relationship? I was like, oh, God damn it. I got the dad mad at me. This is what I didn't need, was the dad mad at me.
I'll never get in again.
You never want the dad mad at you anywhere.
Never.
Anywhere in life, don't get the dad mad at you. Like, somehow I got the dad mad at me that one time. But I still go in there all the time. Our record, This Desert Life's on the wall in there.
Yeah.
So I feel welcomed. Let's see, Roberto's up in the Bronx. It's right off Arthur Avenue.
Okay, haven't been there.
Roberto's is phenomenal Italian food.
I feel like these are all Italian.
They are all Italian, which is weird. It's not.
Number 2 or number 1? We're kind
Kura is a sushi bar in the Village, and I'm not sure it's actually still there. But I don't know if it survived the pandemic. But that guy was an artist with the blowtorch. I mean, he was so good. I don't generally want my sushi blowtorch because I feel like it's cooked now. I don't want it cooked. But this guy did a thing with that blowtorch where it just touched it and it just gave it this flavor that added. I mean, he was incredible.
So if it's not open, don't go there. But we'll have to check if it's open.
And then
maybe number 1. I mean, this could be your number 1.
These are not in order in any way, but I will say my pal David Burke, any of his restaurants, the Tavern, or I guess David Burke and Donatello's not. It's called something else now. Townhouse, maybe. He's such an incredible, inventive, creative chef. He's one of like the most.
Like a Willy Wonka.
He makes food like I make songs. He's so creative with it.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's anybody like it. And I'm probably forgetting 90 of my favorite restaurants, but those 5 stick out.
Awesome.
Well, and it has a lot of Italian people. You're right.
That's true. Well, let's talk about, you're always championing other bands, and I know you have a festival, you have a podcast. You still doing the podcast?
Well, we haven't gotten back to it yet, but we stopped during the pandemic, and now we're going to start up, I think, this month.
Okay. Well, your top 5 most underrated rock bands.
Oh, Big Star for sure. Gang of Youth. They're my favorite rock band in the world.
Yeah.
Him and Chris Carrabba from Dashboard. They're people we send each other music when we're working on stuff. They're my things to bounce off of. But I think Gang of Youth is the best rock band in the world right now. I think his songwriting is so spectacular. He blows my mind. But that band is also just blistering. They're incredible. Dashboard, because I don't think people always appreciate how great Chris is as a writer, as a singer. In a world where like irony and attitude are more popular than earnestness, Chris is truly heartfelt.
You have a great friendship with him too.
Yeah, he's one of my favorite people in the world. He's brilliant. He's just such an artist. Like, he's incredible, just as a human being, but also his music is, for years, just blown my mind. I'm not sure there's a better outro in all of music than the outro to Hands Down. The chorus out on Hands Down is so incredible to me. The visual detail in the lyrics, and also just the music with this explosive, like, joy, pain, the whole thing. It's just. So I'll say Dashboard and Gang of Youths. My friend Stephen Kellogg, I love his music. He's just
Band called the Sixes?
He had a band called the Sixers. Now he's more solo.
Right.
But we did a song together like a year ago. One of his songs that I heard him play with his daughters once knocked me out so completely that I asked when he was opening for us on tour, I'm like, can we do a version of that? I want to do your song in the encore, like of the show. It's called Almost Woke You Up. And we recorded it at a gig like 2 years ago. And it's on, I don't know if it's on our Spotify. It's definitely on his, but it's called Almost Woke You Up. It's a live version from some show we played together with me and Steven, my band, his band, and his daughters singing
Amazing.
on it. He's incredible.
And we got one more.
Wait, that's four? It's
That's
Gang
four.
of Youth, Big Star. Yeah. Chris.
Dashboard, Stephen Kellogg.
Yeah. Let's go with Sean Barna, because I don't think a lot of people know his music right now. And he's played our festivals a bunch of times. And Immer and I played on a lot of the last couple records that he made. And he's an incredible, like a young Bowie, Lou Reed making music about queer life in America. And he's just, his portrayals of the scene around him remind me of Velvets and Lou Reed stuff. It reminds me of like Coney Island Baby. And he's captured like this vibe of Mott the Hoople and the Velvets and Lou Reed and, you know, that kind of all that Bowie-centric culture that there was right then. He's writing about this like gay life in America in a way that is so powerful. It just reminds me of nothing short of like the scene around Bowie then.
Yeah.
I think he's really brilliant.
Well, check out all those artists. And last but not least, if you could tell me your top 5 albums of all time, Adam Duritz.
Fuck, I have no idea. Kind of Blue by Miles Davis.
Great record. Comes up on a lot of lists.
Yeah, it should.
Yeah.
It should. It's I mean, you could name a lot of Miles albums. I just named that one because I think it's the easiest one for people to get into, but also it's just, most people don't, even great artists don't always break ground and push the art form forward. I don't know that we have, you know, necessarily. I think we've made great records, but I don't know that it's groundbreaking stuff. But he did it like 8 times in his career.
Yeah.
You know, like, anyways, Kind of Blue, Blue by Joni Mitchell.
Okay. Another classic.
A Walk Across the Rooftops by the Blue Nile. And yes, it is a theme, accidentally.
It's all blue.
It's your fault with that curtain.
We got 2 more.
Yeah.
In no particular order, I guess.
They're
Unless
not really in order. Big number 1 record by Big Star, probably.
Maybe that's your number 1.
Nope. I think Kind of Blue is my number 1. Shit, that's hard. What's the last one?
Might there be a Van Morrison record in there?
Oh, I didn't. Shit, I was gonna go with What's Going On by Marvin Gaye.
Oh, great record too. Classic.
But yeah, I should have put Astral Weeks in there somewhere, but I didn't somehow. It is the problem with the lists because there's too
Could be
many.
honorable mention.
Yeah, they're not in any order, and so maybe my number 1 record was Astral Weeks, but it's not. It's really Miles. But yeah, I feel like What's Going On is such a groundbreaking record.
It is. It is and was.
Yeah, I could put the Mothership Connection in there too, but P-Funk is or like you know what? One of my favorite. I forgot. 3 Feet High and Rising is probably my number 1 record of all time by De La Soul.
Oh yeah, great record.
And Dave Trugoy the Dove died last year. It's a shame. My first manager, Martin Kirkup, just passed away last week.
Oh, sorry to hear.
It's a weird thing about getting to our age in a way that like you really need to not waste time in your life. You need to not put things off is the main thing, because like we're at a point in our lives where people it can become too late to do certain things.
Yeah.
Just call somebody up and say hi. But, you know.
And it's never good to hold grudges. Just whatever you have to say it. I've done that a bunch of times. I think it's important. Yeah, definitely. Well, listen.
I'm big on grudges. I'm gonna hold some grudges. I'm going to keep my grudges. Okay. My grudges are going nowhere. But people I should have talked to, I wish I'd talked to them.
Yeah, I'd love to do a part 2. This is great. Check out Counting Crows on tour with Santana coming up, starting in June. It was just announced today. Exciting. Very exciting. We'll do this again. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Live
Thank
from
you so
here.
much.
It was
Appreciate
us.
It was awesome. Thanks, Adam.